I believe that more than 90% of modern medicine could disappear from the face of the earth. Doctors, hospitals, drugs, and equipment, and the effect on our health would be immediate and beneficial. These are the words of Robert Mendelssohn, a medical doctor who published his book, Confessions of a Medical Heretic, back in 1979. And even though this was over 40 years ago, this truth is even more pronounced today than ever before. We are filled to the brim with doctors and new equipment and medications and surgeries, but it seems that our society is getting sicker instead of getting better. And what is most frightening is that the doctors who are supposed to be there to help us get well are usually the very people who get us sicker instead of better. And why is that? Because they're simply not trained to do well by us. They are not equipped to know the root causes of chronic conditions. Hello and welcome to the Health Wizard podcast. I'm your host, Yelena Isolde Medici, a health and life coach. I'm so excited that you're choosing to listen to my podcast because you are choosing to make your health your priority. The Health Wizard podcast is dedicated to teaching natural, easy to implement practices that you can use to get your health on track and become the person you used to be before getting sick and the person you're dreaming of becoming again, happy, healthy, full of energy, and living a life filled with joy. Now, very quickly, before we dive into the good stuff, I want to remind you that this podcast is intended for education and entertainment purposes only. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice. If you have a medical condition, please seek the help of a licensed medical professional. I am not a medical doctor. I do not treat, diagnose, prescribe, or make claims outside of my areas of expertise. So by choosing to listen to the Health Wizard podcast, you take full responsibility for your own actions. And when you hear the testimonials of the people who were able to get well, realize that their outcomes depended on their effort and their specific situation. With that said, let's jump into today's episode. Please enjoy. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Health Wizard podcast. Today, we're going to take you by your hand and guide you through the process of identifying what most doctors were never trained and probably will not be trained on for the next couple of 100 years, and specifically generational trauma and how it contributes to the development of thyroid, hormone, and autoimmune disorders such as hyper and hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, Graves' disease, endometriosis, and I can go on and on with the list, including infertility and things like anxiety and panic attacks and depression. We have been in the business that we are running for over a decade now, and I have worked with women and men from over 30 different countries. In the beginning of my journey, I thought that healing was so simple. You eat a whole foods, plant-based, low-fat diet, and lo and behold, you're going to be cured. And then I found out from practice and my personal experience that alone is not enough, that we need to go deeper. Then I learned that, well, maybe we need to introduce fitness, and that is great. Of course, we need to move. And then we hit a wall with some of our clients. And what we've discovered through a lot of experimentation and experience is most health issues are not a direct byproduct of a poor diet. Most of us are much more complex in who we are and how we're built as humans. So we need to go much deeper into our psyche.
Yes, absolutely. And what I find that when I started this program and then when I studied psychology and I went to see the doctors, what in healing, the main thing is to address everything. It's not the one area that is affected. That's why, going into the whole healing, the whole health, it is to address every single thing. And when you say that it's not only diet, it's not only exercise, it needs to be emotional health as well, and psychological health, and everything in one for us to be 100% healthy. So to address trauma, to address childhood trauma, generational trauma, physical trauma, it is important in order to feel 100% good.
Right. And if most of us don't even know. So, trauma we understand as humans. That's why we're going to take our listeners in a wild ride today. We are familiar with trauma, and there are many forms of traumatic experiences a human being can go through. There is sexual trauma, there's emotional trauma, psychological trauma, there's can be physical trauma, there can be dietary trauma, but very few of us know about how generational trauma can affect us. If you talk to me over 10 years ago, I'd be like, this is all woo woo stuff. This is not real. Because I was very much black and white. This is science. This is what we do. It was only through this experience with myself and with my clients that I realized that, yes, trauma makes a huge difference. And we'll talk about how trauma actually does break down the body. But generational trauma, which means it was passed down to you from maybe your mom and daddy, from your grandparents, from your grandparents, and so on. Our first knee jerk reaction, especially given that our doctors are not trained on it and they're going to look at us and roll their eyes, would be this is just a bunch of woo woo. This is not real. And we're more likely to walk away from this as a possibility. When you're going through a traumatic experiences, now all of us are familiar with the term that we go into fight or flight. Now, through years of experience, I found out that there were not two F's, there are four F's. There's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. What this means is your body, your psyche, your entire being wants to either freeze and do nothing because we're too afraid. It's kind of, I don't know if you've ever seen videos of fainting goats or in Gali. That always makes me think about freeze. You get scared, it's like, whoop, you're over and you can't move. Everything is paralyzed in you. Some of us flee from problems. We want to avoid them. Some of us will get exactly into the opposite. We're going to fight with either the situation, the person, but we're going to be protecting us through fight. But there's also fawning, which is people pleasing, especially pronounced in children who were raised by very domineering parents. That there's a lot of criticism going on, and they were always made like they need to live up to a higher standard and that they're not good enough. And so finding happens is let's make other people happy so that we can be left alone. So the four F's, they produce hormones of stress. And hormones of stress will basically freeze our normal hormone production. So if your body had to choose between surviving right now, Rimgali, and that means keeping your heart working and your brain and being maybe fertile so you can conceive, it always will go into survival mode and ensure that you can just be alive. So the body would suspend what it would count as unnecessary, non-essential systems and hormone production and will go into a survival mode. And you're producing hormones of stress and you're bathing in them. And at the same time, that stress, the whole process steps out of your minerals, your nutrients, your vitamins, everything that is essential for you to produce the right amounts of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and all of the other hormones. And we're not only talking about reproductive hormones here, but all the hormones that are running your heart and your weight regulation here, and so much more. So there are many ways that we are affected by hormones of stress, but it is done in a way that the body will protect itself. So if there's a lion right now running after my daughter, I'll be there fighting for her life. And when that horrific event is over, my body can go back to producing normal hormones and living an untraumatized life. But most of us don't just have this extreme experience and we're back to normal. Most of us, especially in our society right now, we're parked in chronic stress. So the trauma happens to you. And I think, Rimgali, you lived through some of the trauma that we'll discuss today. I lived through some of the trauma. And the event is over. But what stays with us is the memory. There's a great book. I think I mentioned it in the last podcast. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. And the whole idea here is your body remembers what happened. An event happens, we create this moment in space and time in our psyche that remembers this trauma. And then later on, as we're not in the immediate trauma, immediate danger, our body replays it and our mind replays the memory. And when you replay the memory, you're actually having same physiological responses as if you were right there in that event going through that trauma. I don't love heights. I never knew it until I was over a huge, huge bridge I was driving over and I looked down and I was like, oh my God, I can't breathe. So for me, if you were to tell me now that I need to go and drive over either a tall bridge, or if you told me, Elena, you have to go and jump out of a plane with a parachute because your life depends on it, that event can be days away, but my psyche would already be creating that event and preparing how am I going to survive. And I'll replay it. And what you will notice is if you have phobias like this, is that your body will start producing hormones of stress. There will be hyperventilation, shallow breathing, your heart rate is increased, and you're here in the comfort of, well, in my case, my office. So what happens? Your body is so powerful, your mind, I should say, is so powerful that it can create an event without an actual event, but we can create it outside of time and space. And as long as we have that trauma in our body that has not been released or dealt with, we're basically parked in that time and space. And even though chronologically we might be aging, psychologically, we're still going through that traumatic experiences. And for all intents and purposes, we're living in the past, in that very traumatic experience, which means that we're stuck in a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn zone, which means that we have an ongoing chronic stress that is stretched out over sometimes years and years of our lifetime that is causing for the body to break down. Because while you're tapping out from your mineral and vitamin and nutrient storages, because when you're fight, flight, or freeze or fawn, you're using a lot of resources. It's kind of like if you're in a car and you're, instead of starting off slowly, you're taking that pedal to the metal and you're pushing all the way down. The tires are squealing. You smell their burnt rubber. You're going to use a lot of energy. And if you keep going at that rate, you're going to burn through your gasoline storage very quickly. And that's what we do. We don't have just one event enough. Traumatic experiences live with us. Now, Rumgali is a psychologist and she's familiar with the world of talk therapy. For me, I know talk therapy didn't do jack for me. It was useless. If anything, it put me back into the same situation, reliving it. I quit it very quickly because all it did, it traumatized me more.
You know what? I believe that psychology, psychotherapy, talk therapy, whatever it is a part of medical field. And medical field is not trained basically to help us. They want to keep us in that situation because we become, a constant money machine for them. And they just keep us constantly in a situation to come back for them. The same is with medication, prescription. They want people to come back. They're not focused on the outcome and helping you. They're focused to keep you coming back. So that's why when I studied psychology, it never made 100% sense for me. The same as it was with doctors. I understand when we have a broken bone or something, we go to see doctors if it's an accident, if we need a surgery or something. Yes. But when it comes to our stress, emotions, it's not enough to talk about it. You have to take actions. You have to take responsibility and release the trauma, release the past, and move on. Talking therapies keeps you in that past all the time, repeating those emotions, going through them every single time. And what it helps, you feel better after talking, but it's temporary. So it's like a Band-Aid on a wound.
Which is very interesting point to make because I know until recently, a lot of talk therapy also revolves around making somebody into a victim. It might have been your father wound or your mother wound and blame somebody else. I was watching a documentary yesterday. It was Amy Schumer. She's a comedian and she has a 3-part series on HBO about her pregnancy and how she was also working during that time. And she had a condition that she was severely thrown up throughout her whole pregnancy. Piece of history that was built into that was mind blowing for me was that back even as late as 1950s, psychiatrists believe that a woman throwing up throughout her pregnancy was her unresolved emotions, maybe with her mother or attention seeking. 1950s, a woman can be in the hospital because they would recommend that she would be checked in. She needs to be observed at all times because, well, God forbid, pregnancy is a disease, apparently. If she throws up, the doctors would make her sit in her vomit to discourage her from doing it again.
Seriously.
Seriously, a body had a reaction, but they're going into this is kind of like talk therapy, right? Let's talk through it. See, did you have a mother issue? Maybe it's your way of rebelling against being pregnant. And they did not consider other factors. Modern day talk therapy, and given the fact, like you acknowledged it, Rimgali, it does help sometimes, right? It allows you to get something off your chest, but it does not address that deep seated trauma. One of the things that we use with our clients when they come from traumatic experiences, and this is something we'll touch on later, is trauma release exercise. It's a physiological exercise that was created to help people that the talk therapy failed and the psychiatry failed. So let's take somebody like a war veteran. They come back from maybe Afghanistan and they have the horrors of war imprinted on their soul. And most of the times in talk therapy, they'll have to talk and basically live through it over and over again. In the world of psychiatry, they will be medicated, but they still have not resolved the trauma in them. So it gets so bad that eventually this physiological trauma release exercise was created to bypass even the psyche to start releasing trauma from a physiological point of view. But I'm jumping the gun here. But talk therapy can become a crutch. I think I had a client about 4 or 5 years ago. She was in talk therapy for 5 years. She was not any better. By the time she came to me, she already had to quit her job. She was never leaving the house. And then we got her back on track within 3 months.
I know people having talk therapies every single week, seeing their therapist, and it's been for years. So I understand if you don't have a supportive, family, supportive system around you, and you need to talk, you need somebody to listen and listening ear and everything. That's okay. That's a way to have. I understand that. It's a way, if to release temporary what's on your chest, as you mentioned, and just to let go. But for healing trauma and releasing emotions and releasing it from your body, it has to be more than just the talk. It's not enough. It's the same like we know things, we can learn and read every single book and understand every single thing. But if you are not applying it to your life, if you are not taking actions, if you are not experiencing and expressing and doing things, you will stay in the same with all this knowledge. You will not move forward. It's not enough to know. It's not enough to understand. You have to take actions. You have to work on that to be able to achieve the results.
Right. And most of us, because of our human wiring, we are wired to go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn because we want to preserve ourselves. And we've been trained, I think, by our society, religion, and just humanity in general is if it's painful, put it away. Quick example, my sister was visiting out of town over the weekend. She came, my daughter just turned 9. It was great surprise. She came out, it was wonderful. And we took him to the airport last night. And as we're getting home, my sister messages me, how is she doing? And my daughter was crying. She loves her auntie so much. And my sister immediately goes, well, I left some ice cream in the freezer there. Give her some ice cream. I was like, no. We don't solve emotional wounds with food. They don't. But that's what we are trained to do in our society in general is we have coping mechanisms. We stuff ourselves with foods, with medications, with watching more Netflix, addictions of sorts. We create a new addiction that is distracting us from having to face the reality of the trauma. Well, thankfully for my daughter, she has a mother who understands this. I allowed her to go through the emotions and feel them so that she can get to a point and release them rather than, oh, let's go eat some ice cream. We're going to feel better, but we're not feeling grief. It's okay to feel grief. And I think that most people who've gone through trauma, they actually are not allowed to complete the process, and which is very important, right? We either get stuck on reliving the trauma over and over again, but never completing it, or we shove it down so deeply within us that we don't even know it's there anymore. But in the background, the subconscious mind, your psyche, it's always there and it runs through your body over and over again. Consciously go, I don't know what's going on with me. Subconsciously, your body is breaking down. So this brings us to a very interesting point here, because the point of this podcast is how generational trauma is affecting us. Generational trauma is something that's passed down to us from our parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles. And it was actually something that was studied in the beginning of the 20th century. Then it was shoved all the way back to into oblivion because the doctors, the allopathic medicine took over and they said, we have scans, we have surgeries, we have medicine. We don't need to go digging that deep. So even with a personal firsthand experience of trauma, what we found is oftentimes women who come to us who had experienced firsthand trauma, sexual, emotional, psychological, or any other trauma of any kind, they're the ones who are most likely to develop autoimmune conditions. But sometimes we get clients who come to us and they go, no, I had amazing parents. I don't know what's going on with me. Now that's weird because some of us have some kind of dark spots in our lives from our parents and grandparents because we're programmed verbally. Maybe we're not good enough. And Rimgali, you should look better. You should do better, right? A lot of us have that. But once in a while we get where parents, I had amazing parents. I was never told I'm ugly or stupid or anything like this. So you would just say I had amazing parents in that sense. But some of us still go, but there's something still going on inside of me. I cannot put my finger on it. We had clients where we go through all of our root causes and we have collected over 18 that we examine when we work with them. And we go, nope, check on this, good on this, good on this, good on this. And then it feels like there's nothing else to explore. And this is where we dive deep into generational trauma. There's now science, ladies and gentlemen, that shows to us that trauma can be passed down to you from your parents, from either your maternal, paternal parents, but especially maternal parents. And here's the science behind it. As little girls, and all of us come from little girls one way or another, whether you're male or female, our mothers have all of their eggs while they're in utero in our grandmothers. So if your grandmother is carrying your mother, Rimgali, your mother inside of your grandmother already had the egg that eventually became you, which means that whatever your grandmother was going through at that point emotionally, and for you, probably generationally, it could have been World War II, right? It could have been famine. My mother and my grandparents went through World War II and famine and the revolution. So everything that our foremothers, in this sense, we're going through, we were already programmed with those hormones, with those chemicals in utero. We were formed. So if a grandmother is going through a stressful situation, then her daughter is affected. And by default, whatever eggs the mother is carrying, they are being affected too. So scientifically speaking, now we can trace it to at least the 3 generations of people being affected by generational trauma just by being physiologically connected. Now, this is not something that we just stumbled upon. It took some research. When I start looking into it, we have some materials and training that we use with our clients to get through that. There's a great book titled It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. I highly recommend it. And this is exactly the point where we dive in to understand if you have what seems like an idyllic life, Rimgali, but you still end up having some kind of issues with your hormones or thyroid, or it could be any other issues, or maybe you are having panic attacks and you cannot find any direct relation in the present moment as to what is causing it. Then this is the time we dive in and we go, what was your grandmother's life like? And now your grandmother was in the utero of your great grandmother. What was her life like? So what we do is we start exploring. It takes some chronological historical digging, and it will take for everybody who is listening here, if this is something you're facing on your part, to find out family's history. What were they going through? So for Rimgali and I, I come from a former Soviet Union. Our people went through a lot of things. Generationally, we're programmed for scarcity, for savings. We're also very independent. And I can tell you that immediately we're very much rebels when it comes to government authorities because we had experienced that generationally. And this can go into physiological things as well.
Yes, and it's a lot of, already stories and studies done. For example, with post-traumatic stress disorders, for those who came back from the wars, from, like you said, War One, War Two, and it's already scientifically proven that their generations like their children, they will have the stress in their body. They may react to the sounds more sensitive. They may be living in the fear. They would be more, protective and more like reacting to the things that would remind, and it's in their DNA already pre-programmed because their generations went through that, and it's passed through generations. It's already proven. Another thing, it could be their parents living in the countries that it's constantly in the war, like Iraq and something. And if their grandparents moved to the States, and their kids may never been in that country, but they still would have this fear of war, fear of the sounds. I remember we had a client who couldn't sleep at night, remember, because she was having the nightmares of the war constantly. So it's already, I remember I read a story that a young man, he stopped sleeping at 21 because somebody in his family had the same uncle or somebody, even not so close
Yeah, so that one
related.
was actually from the book that I referred to a little bit earlier. It didn't start with
Okay.
you. So this young boy, right around 20, 18 or 21, he stopped sleeping at night because he was afraid that he would die in his sleep. And when they did all the research, there was no psychological firsthand trauma. But when they did some investigative family digging, what they found is that his uncle froze to death at that very same age. So it was as if it was incompleted life, and now it jumped a generation and ended up on him. And there are steps you can do to release it, and we'll mention those in a few. But this is a very interesting study that yes, that can happen when all of a sudden you're afraid of death and you don't know why. There might be a reason.
I bet that every single family can find something, that we adopted from our families. It could not be even physical. It could be that your grandmother was not happy about how she looked, or she felt not loved, or she was neglecting herself. And we as kids, being in the environment, we absorb, we are like sponges. We drink emotions, we drink psychological environment, and we go through life without even understanding why we do not love ourselves, why we feel about ourselves the way we do, even if our parents, for example, would love us, right, and be good for us. Somehow, somewhen we adopted, we heard something, and it's stuck in our psychic, it's stuck in our body, and until we release it, we live with that. It's a trauma, it's a generational trauma. We take it over.
Yeah, so some generational trauma is not apparent immediately. This is where you have to become a detective. But some trauma that you're alluding to is absolutely is familial expectations, familial habits, lifestyle. We had many clients who come to us and they had very domineering parents, mothers especially. You need to look a certain way, you need to meet my expectations, or people will look at you and your mothering style. I'm just using you as an example, but let's say one of our clients, and they'll say, well, your mother is so beautiful, she was a model, why don't you look more like her? Or you don't even have to hear those things. For example, if you're a young child and you have a mother who is gorgeous and she's getting all the praise, and then inside you go, oh, am I not good enough? And maybe you start chasing after this ideal of what a woman should look like. Or I had a client a few years ago, she said her mother was so obsessed with her weight that whenever the children would eat, she would make them get on bicycles and go work out immediately after a meal so that they wouldn't get fat. Now, the mother, whatever trauma she lived through, because that was her story, she meant well, but she traumatized those little girls, and it traumatizes on many levels a child. So this is a firsthand trauma, but could be that that mother learned it from grandmother, who learned it from her great grandmother, and so on and so forth.
It could be even from the pregnancies. It could be that, your grandmother or mother had a difficult pregnancy, and she was scared, and she was, anxious, and she was nervous. So the baby inside her body felt all those emotions, and it may feel always scared, but don't know of what. It's just not the
Or it can
emotion.
end up growing up and saying, I don't feel like I should have any children. And when you ask them why, they go, I don't know. But if
Yeah.
you look at it investigatively, that child experienced in utero that Having a baby and having a pregnancy might be very scary. I actually met women like that. One of my clients, I usually ask women what their goals are when they want to reverse a hormone imbalance. And I asked this woman, I said, okay, what is conception, pregnancy, one of your goals? She goes, no, I don't want to be a mother. Well, I left it alone, but the more I got to know the client, I said, okay, let's revisit that and tell me why. I'm not here to convince people either way, but I usually look at what there was a very strong response. Oh my God, no, no way, never. And I go, okay, why? Very strong emotional response. And the more we dug into it, her story went from, well, I just don't feel like I would be a good mother. It's meant for me to. Eventually, she realized she did not want to become a mother like her mother was. She did not want to damage her children. So it was something that you cannot verbalize. But if you're in utero, for example, and your mother did not want that pregnancy and you're being rejected, then you might grow up and that my mother might turn around and love you now, but that rejection is still deep within you because you are not lovable. I'm not good enough. And you might go through a lifetime of running the story in the background. Rumgali, I'm not good enough. I'm not beautiful enough. Nobody will ever love me. While the people in your life keep telling you you're wonderful, you're beautiful, I love you, but that internal story is so deep seated because it was embedded into your DNA that unless you know how to uncover it and bring it to the surface, can lead to a lot of things. For women, imagine if we don't feel we're lovable, what do we do? We're fawning a lot. We're going modifying our body to look more beautiful. We might go through several relationships. The possibilities are endless here. But one of the things that can happen is if you internally beating yourself down over and over again, the body will respond. If you feel like I'll never be good enough, nobody will love me, the body goes into this depressive state. You're producing hormones of stress, and now you're creating illnesses from within you. It's a suicide of sorts. You're trying to take yourself out emotionally. Your body goes, let me expedite the process so you don't have to stay on this human planet for much longer. Let's kill you. Let's get you sick. Right. So it's almost for self preservation. And some of us go on levels that are, let me beat everybody to the punch and put myself down and minimize my importance so nobody else can reject me again.
That's sad, and it's actually, when you understand it, it's so powerful that it's not only physical, it's not only emotional, it's generational that can affect our present. So much needed to be addressed in order to be healthy and figure out what's going on in your life. If you can't figure out what's going on the surface and in your personal life, you have to dig deeper.
Well, most of us, what do we do, Rimgali? When you got sick with Hashimoto's, what did you do? You went to doctors. You went to doctors in two countries. I went to doctors in, actually, I spoke to specialists here and I found somebody in South Africa and I was talking to a chemist there, like, just get me well. We'll look for for an external fix to our internal problem. And our doctors are simply not equipped. You were trained as a psychologist. What did you find? Psychology in America is an extension of the medical industry. Yeah, I will bet they probably never talked about generational trauma.
We never been taught about it, not in masters, not in bachelors, never.
Yeah, I doubt that it will be added to the curriculum for at least another 100 years or so. It's highly unlikely because the modern medicine and psychology, psychiatry included, we are trained to victimize the person. I have actually a very brilliant woman in my community here that she was studying in psychology. And she left the college. She said, I can't handle it anymore because they're teaching me to tell people that they're helpless, that they are victims, and I cannot agree with it. Now, you might be sitting there and going, okay, this is a new idea. It's a lot to take in. And of course, you can sit there and percolate, but what we're going to do is we're going to help you to walk you through the process of identifying how you can uncover generational trauma, right? First step is whenever we're bringing a new client in, we help them identify all of the possible root causes of their illnesses. We do look at things like the diet, the deficiencies, genetic mutations. We'll look at things like environmental factors. But when we get down and everything checks off and it is okay, or if we address it and it's okay, but we're still stuck, we go into uncovering if there's trauma and then if there's generational trauma. All of us are impacted by generations of experiences. But we're going personal trauma first, and that one is easy to identify. What have you gone through as a child, as an adult, and so on? Then we give our clients the tools. But when you do get into generational trauma, we ask our clients to ask investigative questions. And this is what it normally looks like. First of all, on a personal level, finding a quiet place where you are just to see if there's trauma living in you, and simply closing your eyes and scanning your body mentally to see if there is some kind of anxiety feelings or trembling going on in your body or pain. It's a very simple process to do a body scan. You close your eyes, you go through the process and kind of see and feel where it feels like that the energy in your body is flowing freely or it feels stuck. If it feels stuck, jot it down. One of the things that I've noticed with people with thyroid issues, Rimgali, is that oftentimes they feel like they have stuck energy in their thyroid, right? In the throat area, I should say. It's people who normally don't verbalize or vocalize their needs, and they're fawning, they're people pleasing. They don't allow their true voice be heard, true identities to be revealed. So it's things like this that you can start off with. Simply scan your body. Your body is very, very intelligent. Unlike our medical industry has taught us, is your body is a machine. You treat it independently. Oh, you have a thyroid problem right now. I spoke to somebody a couple of days ago. Doctor said, you have Graves' disease. Well, let's radiate it. She says, I don't want to radiate it. He says, let's cut it out. She says, I want to keep my thyroid. But they treat our bodies as if we have excess parts. Cut out your thyroid, maybe have a hysterectomy, maybe something else. But our body is intelligent, actually keeps memories in every single part of your body. It's not a machine, it's an energetic being. Where energy was Einstein, who proved that matter is energy. So for us to think that I'm not energy, I'm just this flesh, we could not be more wrong, because we are energy, and the energy can be either positive or negative or in between, but energy is always moving. So the body is intelligent. You can do simple things, just simply asking your body, where is my storing my stress? Now, this is just the first level you're identifying, because some of you might go, well, on the surface, it doesn't look like I have any stress, any trauma. Go deeper, look under the hood. If there's nothing to find, there's nothing to find. For most people, there's something to find. Now, you take all of the notes, and then what you can do is look at things as, when do you experience certain things? For example, you might have an anxiety attack every day at 5 o'clock in the morning, and you don't know why, because there was nothing in your life to trigger that anxiety. So it's time to take a pen and paper and go talk to your people. Do investigative work with your family, talk to your mom, your grandma, to your father on father's side, aunts and uncles. And you ask them, was there anybody in the family who went through specific things that might have been similar to mine? This is how you get investigatively involved, and you can build out a chronological family story, and you can start seeing if it came from somebody else. Maybe it was your grandmother who was in World War II, and maybe at 5 o'clock in the morning, one day she was dragged out of her bed by Nazis. And now somewhere, somehow you're feeling that it's just an echo of the past, but it's happening to you. I was working with a client a few years ago where she had trauma, but she kept saying, everything's fine. Everything's fine. I didn't have any trauma. And I encouraged her to speak to her father. Well, it ended up that she was adopted into the family. And there were a lot of stories that came up through the process that she did not know, because she was too young to remember, and the parents held it back to protect them. But what we uncovered, there was a lot of trauma from her family that gave her up for adoption, and her trauma that caused her to be sick over a period of time. So having honest conversations sometimes is not fun. It's totally necessary. So now let's say that you have gone through this honest conversations, you build your chronological family history. Then you go, okay, what do I do with all the things that I just found out? Now, the book that I recommended, there are a couple of books I'm actually going to mention here. One is It Didn't Start With You. It's by Mark Wolynn. It's spelled Wollynn. And the second one is called The Emotion Code by Dr. Bradley Nelson. Those two books are amazing in a sense that they will give you the tools to start. The one that's The Emotion Code will give you the tools to start identifying emotions stored in your body. The book that It Didn't Start With You will give you simple tools to start addressing those traumatic experiences that do not belong to you, or maybe they belong to you but it was a handed down experience. Sometimes you find, if you find out that it was not your experience to complete, then you simply let it go. So sometimes it's enough to bring an event to your awareness to realize that you don't have to obsess over it every night. You're having that anxiety attack and you go, I don't know where it's coming from, but the moment you found out that it might have belonged to somebody else, you simply go like this: it didn't start with me. It's not my emotion to complete. I release it. It belongs maybe with your aunt or an uncle or a grandma. By simply knowing that you can detach yourself from that emotion, you can receive a relief from that emotion. Sometimes it's much deeper than that, and you might go through a lot more, but these are just some techniques that you can implement immediately. Another one that I really, really love is creating a new identity. So let's say if you had anxiety or panic attacks or depression or even thyroid issues and you didn't know where they start, and you've done all of the steps that we normally would cover: the diet, the lifestyle, the genetic mutations and whatnot, and whether it was your firsthand experience or somebody else's, you created a sick identity around your disease. The identity for you, Ringali, was you were so sick, you had to let go of your business and you did not even want to be alive because, well, you're just plastered on the couch, like you mentioned on the last podcast. For me, my life slammed me upside down and I kept saying, why me? I didn't do anything wrong. So the identity was created. I was a victim. What I had to do, and I know you had to do in your process, is create a new identity. And we start with creating new beliefs and new truths. If an old belief is running through your body and it says you're not good enough, we need to create a new belief that says I am enough. But don't just create that belief, you make it as a belief that belongs in your psyche, in your body. If you're somebody who struggles with not being enough in your life, you simply 100 times a day, if you need to, you go, I am enough. But then you sit there and you feel the emotion of being enough. And by just feeling that new experience in your body, you're going to create a new chemical reaction. And now instead of releasing hormones of stress, you're releasing normal hormone production. Understanding the fact that the words have energy. If I called you ugly, Rimgali, right now, your immediate response would be, oh my God, I'm hurt, right? So there's an immediate psychological and emotional response versus Rimgali, you're so beautiful and you're glowing and you're amazing. All of a sudden you have this feel good emotions in your body, which actually trigger thousands of different chemical reactions, which lead to more health, to more prosperity, in turn to more wonderful relationships. So one of the things that we can do immediately is substituting the emotions that are keeping us sick with a thought and an idea that will create emotions that we will dab positive. I am loved. I am enough. I am always focused. The positive reinforcement, but not just saying them. The key here is feeling them. If you feel them in the body, then the body will create new reactions. When you create new reactions and there's no more hormones of stress are being released, you're no longer depleting the body. Now your body is being replenished with the foods that you will be eating that should be healing, a whole foods plant-based diet. And the goal here is to stay very, very much consistent. You cannot do something for a day and then wish that you would solve it all. We have more than enough of weekend warriors, people who do dieting for 2 weeks. They're perfect. And then they go off into oblivion, or people who work out only on the weekend. That never gives us the health outcomes that we want. The key here to release generational trauma is, yes, you'll have those personal conversations with your family member. Yes, you're going to identify where trauma might reside in your body. But at the same time, you're not a victim. And this is the next big realization. So you create a new story about that trauma, that everything that you've been through had served you to become who you are today. And then if you really want to be in love with who you are today, you create that person. And you start from a point that I am enough. I am lovable. I am beautiful. I am worthy of receiving blessings in my life. Whatever speaks to you, the words that are meaningful, you speak over them. And in the beginning, it might feel like they don't belong to you. And you're forcing yourself to say it. But the goal here is consistency.
Yes, and I want to add here that also when you doing and rewriting and creating a new identity, You have to add the emotion, you have to add the feeling, but you also have to act like you love yourself. So, what do you do when you love yourself? How do you treat when you love yourself? Maybe you prioritize yourself more. Maybe you take care of yourself better. So, it comes again to healthy eating, healthy lifestyle, prioritizing your sleep, correct? So, it's everything connected. We have to, change our life from the inside and the outside, constantly putting us into that new identity. And I remember myself when I went through this journey and I felt like I never loved myself. I never treated myself correct. I never been, feeling good enough and everything. And when you asked me to start telling myself I love myself, I'm beautiful and everything, I'm still remember looking for the first time in the mirror straight into my eyes, and I start crying because I didn't know that person. I couldn't look in my eyes. I was like, who is she? How can I tell her I love myself that I don't even know her? I don't even know what matters to her, what's important to her, what does she like, what does she want to be like, and everything. So I remember starting doing and telling myself I love with closed eyes at the beginning until it became my inner dialogue and
Mhm.
until I started to believe that inside. So then I can take a look and tell myself into the eyes, because I already knew that inside that I love myself. That was easier. At the beginning, when I started doing it in front of them, it was hard. I didn't know myself. So I had to change everything, but I kept doing it because I knew I wanted to change that.
Which is a great point that you're bringing up, because if we are the receivers, the recipients of generational trauma, and generational trauma that might not be known immediately, or generational trauma in a way that you were programmed to believe that you need to live up to some expectations that were not originated by you. You never got to develop your identity. Let's say your mother always or father told you how to be and what to do and what not to do, but they never asked for your opinion. You actually never got to become your own person. What you have become is a mere reflection of who they are, because somehow your behavior, your performance reflected on them. And they only wanted the best, right? Rimgali is so good. Was so wonderful. If you look at her, what a great job you all are doing by raising her. So sometimes we're left out of the equation and we don't know who we are. And that's why a lot of us face the midlife crisis, because we go, whoa, the life is halfway gone. Who am I? What am I doing here? First of all, the best gift that we can give our children is to allow them to have opinions and to express themselves. But another gift that we give ourselves and our children is to learn our likes and dislikes, to get in front of a mirror and find out the beauty in everything that makes you, that nose, that hair, that eyes, to look yourself in the eyes, to say, who are you? And then if you don't know who you are, use that not as a reason to shrink away, but actually step forward and go into an exploration.
Curiosity, creativity, exploration, just like courage, be courage and do not shut down yourself. Just be curious about what's going on inside me, what I'm feeling, what do I like, what makes me happy, what makes me angry, why does it make me angry? Maybe it's, stepping out of for my boundaries. Maybe it's something that I don't believe and somebody told me to believe. It's a lot of different things, but curiosity and listening to yourself, it will always, your body again, if it's intelligent creation, it will give you answers if you will listen, if you will
Yeah.
ask yourself questions.
Yeah, and this is actually one of the things that we do with our clients is exploration. It's very, very important to understand who you are as a person, because the moment we have that brokenness, like Rimgali, when you said you looked in the mirror and you didn't even know who you are, well, of course your body was breaking down. It was living with a stranger. It's almost an empty house. As a person, you moved through the day, you had a wonderful family, you had a wonderful business, but you didn't really have anybody living in that beautiful house, which is your body, because you were never allowed, given the permission to become the person that you want to be. So, as adults, we have this awesome responsibility and a privilege that we can write our own story about our identities. So you get in front of that mirror and you create a new belief system and you start speaking and practicing it. And then you take it a step further. If there were people in your family, in your environment, in your job, wherever it is, your friends who are crossing that invisible line that should not be crossed and they're disrespecting you or mistreating you, this is when you say enough is enough and you draw that line in the sand and you say you don't cross this, because now it comes out of self-respect, and instead of going into a fawning mode where you're still stressed and pleasing everybody, you go, it starts with me. What makes me happy first? And when you start with yourself, it does not make you selfish, it's making you self-full. Last time, Rimgali, you touched on the fact that by what we do to ourselves, we're teaching our children what they will do to
Yeah.
themselves. We're also taking this an opportunity. Again, that's why it's not selfishness, self-fullness. We're raising ourselves so that we can reflect back into the world of A, how we're supposed to be treated, and B, how the world should act also. So it's very, very important. So you're going to go through this process. And if you ever had a very, very deep traumatic experience, the big invitation here is don't feel shame about it. We're programmed into shame. I was, my parents are amazing, but I still heard things like, you should be ashamed of that. And you go, why? And I'm a great parent, but once it slipped out of my mouth and I go, oh my God, what did I just say? And Isabella looks at me and goes, why am I supposed to be ashamed, Mom? I said, oh, I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. You're not supposed to be ashamed. We're shamed into a lot of things. So your trauma, your experiences, or even the lack of your acquaintance with yourself should not be something to be ashamed about. Now, if you've gone through a very deep traumatic experience and that you're aware of, maybe it's not generational, or maybe it is generational. Maybe let's say there was sexual abuse. And let's say maybe it was your grandmother that went through it and your mother and now you. And a lot of us, especially as women, well, men do that too. We kind of take that as shame and we embrace it and we live with it and we don't share that experience with anyone. A part of the healing process, first of all, of course, is when you identify what generational trauma is, stopping it with you by reversing the pathway here. You accept yourself. You stop being ashamed of this experience. You share your experience with others. It could be coach. It could be, if you go to talk therapy, your therapist. It could be your friend. You allow that out because you need to disengage yourself from identifying yourself with that trauma. There was a young woman that worked for me a few years ago. She was sexually assaulted. But one of the most beautiful things that I read, Rimgala, by her was that she said, I am not a rape victim. It happened to me. But what she had done is she went through the process and identified all the good things that she's become because of it. She did not identify as a survivor. She identified as a thriver. She was teaching others how to love themselves. She was teaching others how to speak for themselves. What she identified with more with a victor versus a victim identity, which is very, very important because whether we have first-hand trauma or generational trauma, if we're not careful, we start identifying with victimhood, we start producing those hormones of stress, and they're going to make us sicker and sicker. The good news, though, is that we don't have to be that way. We don't have to remain that way. I had my aha moment. I changed it. I said, I will not be ashamed of what happened to me, of my trauma. By the way, if you're interested in what that trauma was, you can go to Amazon and type in Son of a Whore into the search bar, and you're going to find my book that was written by myself and my husband that we released last year that goes into that traumatic experience in my life and will allow you to see how I healed myself. But my big thing was, I'm not a victim. It didn't happen to me. It happened for me. What can I be grateful, no matter how dark the incident was? What can I be grateful for in this process? And I know that this is something you did for yourself as well, Rimgali.
It's easy to go into the victimhood because there is always a payoff in being in a victimhood, right? We get attention, we get all those hormones inside our body. Even the bad hormones are addictive in our body. So it doesn't matter if you are going through the good experience and you feel good hormones, making good hormones, they are our body wants more. So that's how we engage in those experiences, correct? The same happens.
That feel good hormones or traumatic hormones, they're going in the same reward center in your brain. So on one hand, you're going, I hate being this way, I hate being sick. But if you've been releasing hormones that support anxiety and depression, your body goes, I'm addicted, girlfriend. Take me back. I'll make you look for situations and circumstances that will put you right back into that mode. So absolutely, 1000%, they can be addictive.
Yeah, so that's important to understand and to take responsibility that you are in control of your life and not going, into the victimhood, not going that, we cannot forgive, we cannot let go of the past because you are doing it for yourself. Life goes on and you have to take care of yourself. So staying in a victimhood, staying in this, sickness, illness, whatever it is, it's not healthy, it's not good. And we have to reclaim the powers and heal and look for support. And it goes to the living not only in the shame about the experience and trauma and everything, but understanding that you are not alone. So looking for the support, looking for, mentor, coach who is, experienced in the field to help you
I think
to
it's key. You
overcome.
said something earlier. We can read 1,000 books, and I mentioned a couple of books on this podcast, and we can be guilty of receiving knowledge but not having the experiential wisdom that equals transformation. So knowledge goes, great idea, but most of us, because we don't have the accountability, will go, okay, let's try it once, and then goes on a bookshelf. Actually, I think I read an article that over 60% of books that get purchased never get completed, so people don't get finished reading them. First few pages, they're done and they're collecting dust. The goal here is not information. The goal is transformation. And transformation, oftentimes, this is the reason our clients hire us, is they need somebody to hold them accountable, to help them uncover things that are so deep within their psyche that they cannot uncover on their own. And that takes time. So yes, you can try to walk this path alone, but most of the times we lived in this mess alone for so long that we need another pair of eyes to look deeper into our souls to help us dig ourselves out.
Yes, and the more painful experience, the longer the trauma sets in your body, the more accountability and support we need, because our body is already, like I said, addicted to the being in the state. It is also an old habit. It's our mind, it's our body. It behaves automatically. So to change this, it takes time, it takes patience, and going through painful transformation. It's not an easy process. It's not an easy process. So we have to have somebody who went this path, who experienced something, who has not only knowledge, who's not only by the book and by only talk therapy. It needs to have tools and techniques to implement into daily life and to guide you step by step every day.
Absolutely. And personally, I use over 10 different tools just on this one topic to allow our clients to go through the process of rewriting the history, finding out where the problem was, creating new identity. And it is customized to every individual. What works for Rimgali does not work for Mary. What works for Mary does not work for Danielle, and so on and so forth. So we need to really customize it. So hopefully with this podcast, with this episode, we piqued your interest to start investigating where your illnesses might have started from, whether it is endometriosis, infertility, whether it's Hashimoto's or Graves' disease. If you don't have the apparent signs of maybe your diets messing with you, or maybe it was vaccination or medication, you go, I've checked everything else, nothing else is working. This is one of the pieces of the puzzle. Now, mind you, most of our clients don't have just a one event and thing that made them sick. Normally it's a combination, because it could have been generational trauma. When it's neglected, sometimes to comfort ourselves, we are going to go and get addicted to food or substances. Maybe as a byproduct, we go see doctors who do surgeries or give us medications, and it basically piles one on top of the other. So to untangle that web, what we normally do is we lay out all the root causes. Then we go, okay, what is the plan? Let's go piece by piece, step by step, and unravel it. It's kind of like taking a little piece of the yarn of the sweater and unraveling the whole sweater, but you do it only one little loop at a time so that you know exactly where to go, where not to go too prematurely. A few years ago, I had a client that it took me 5 weeks, Rimgali, to earn her trust, to go deep enough for us to start addressing those emotional generational pain points, because she had so much pain that she did not trust any female, specifically because of her maternal experience. And it took me 5 weeks to earn her trust. And after that, things began to unlock. When we got to the finish line, she was symptom free and living an amazing life. But it had to start off with being in the right place at the right time, having the right tools, right techniques. With that said, your interest has been piqued. You can check out those 2 books that I mentioned. And of course, if you don't want to have 2 more books on your bookshelf and you want a personal experience, you can reach out to us. We can schedule a health clarity call to see if we have the tools to help you. You can go to www.360impacthealth.com/schedule, grab that health clarity call. One of us will be on a call with you asking you a few very on point questions to get to the bottom of it. And if we can, we'll schedule an hour-long conversation where we go through exactly how that can be addressed. Or if you don't want to wait and you can hop right into some amazing tools, you want to grab our app. It's called 360-Degree Life. You can do so by going to 360impacthealth.com/app, download the app, get into the community, and you can start a conversation with one of our coaches. If you have generational trauma, you don't want to try to unravel it on your own because, like Rimgali said, the web can be deep and the tunnel can be dark. And sometimes you will give up 100 times on the way out because your old nature, your mental addiction to the hormones of stress will pull you back. It will suck you in. And we need to treat our addiction to illnesses. And most of us are addicted in one way or another. Most of us do draw pleasure from illnesses. We need to treat them the same way that we treat drug addictions, because there will be relapses. It's never a straight line for most people. Very few times do you get a client, it's straight line. There's always a setback. Rimgala said, it's not always pleasant. It's just necessary. And that's exactly what we can do.
And no matter what, it's so worth it. I can tell it. Doesn't matter how painful, doesn't matter how hard it is. It's so worth it because it changes you and your life. It affects your relationship. It affects your professional life, your purpose, everything. So it's so worth it to go this journey and to transform your life and to release all this trauma and to become healthy, happy, and living your life in this way.
Yeah, nothing can substitute that. We can either walk through our lives as somebody else's reflection of somebody else's making, or we can become who we truly are. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Health Wizard podcast. We will see you next week once again with more mind-blowing and transformative information. For now, what we're going to ask you is very simple. If you enjoyed what you heard, please go ahead and share this podcast with as many people as you can. And then, of course, go ahead and give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcasting platform, because the more reviews we have, the more people can see this. And the more people we can touch, the more of our humanity can be healed and whole. Have a fantastic rest of the day. There you have it. I hope you enjoyed today's topic. If you did, make sure to subscribe to the Health Wizard podcast, and please don't forget to tell others about it. If you would like to get more information about me and what I do, how I help amazing human beings just like you to achieve their dream health, go to www.360impacthealth.com. Go to the contact page and shoot me a note. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Health Wizard podcast. This is your host, Yelena, wishing you optimal natural health.